All right, so let's talk about drums and bass. We'll start with the bass so we have some context of what's going on. Let's hide everything that we don't need to be looking at because we're artists and life's already hard, right? Um, Let me start off by saying that as we go through these raw tracks and then put plugins on, nothing's really level matched, and I don't have everything grouped. I don't have things bust out the way I typically like to. I don't have my VCAs over here. This was a let's get the sound, let's make it sound good, let's see what happens sort of situation. I went into Logic, I think Alchemy, and just found something really low and subby that worked for the song and the range of where it was being played on a keyboard. And then use that in correlation with the Native Instruments Rickenbacker bass. So I like that because it gives me that thump of a Rickenbacker, and then it gives me that modern, subby low end of just your run-of-the-mill stock DAW synth bass. And then what I did on top of that was threw an arpeggiator on, so I could be real lazy and just let it go, right? After I did that, I then reamped the bass. So what do I mean by reamp it? Sent the output of my DAW out to the amp, mic'd it with an RE20 to grab all that sub low end frequency, and then a 421 to grab the bite. And that's typically my two favorite mics on a bass cabinet in this room. The live bass, your low end is just gonna go, it's gonna feel so dull and so lame. So reamping synth bass for me is really cool because it puts that air in between the source, the speaker, and the microphone. And then when I go to record live bass, we're still gonna need to jack up the low end to get it to balance out. However, they're gonna have a very similar quality with that air. So here's the reamped synth bass, which we bounced out once we liked. And this is what it sounded like. Cool. So we got a lot of ambience on there, and that might get scary, right? As we start going into our mix, we have all this low frequency crap, right? Just taking up too much room. We'll see. So the first thing I put on here was just a Logic channel EQ. And basically, I am just taking out a whole bunch of highs because I felt like when I put it through the bass amp was giving me a grit that I didn't like. So here it is without. Here it is with. And to hear the difference, pay attention to the very top end of the bass. Here it is again without, and then I'll put it on with. And listen to the very top end and how it just gets scooped right out. So that made a big difference for me. Right after that in the chain, we're using one of my favorite plugins, and you guys know about it if you've watched my other Making the Mix series, Track Spacer by Waves Factory. This is an unbelievable sidechain plugin that does so much more than just key a signal to another signal. So I set this up in a way where it's keying the soft kick drum, and we'll get to what that's doing later. But for now, you can actually just see on here that whenever that kick drum that I'm sidechaining it to hits, the bass is going to drop pretty much just by a ratio of 23%. So it's not dropping very much, but you'll see it. So it's knocking out some of those frequencies in the kick drum in the bass so the kick can kind of win the battle. Just a little bit. Okay, after that, I have a Transient Designer, and the attack is almost on stun. So why am I doing this? Let's listen with and then without. So with it on, it brought back what I lost by putting that initial EQ on. With the EQ, I got rid of that grit and the graininess that was on the bass, but it kind of made me lose the fact that I had an arpeggiator on the bass. Without the Transient Designer, the bass started just becoming instead of I wanted more of those transients. So the attack on the SPL, which I love, will sometimes crap out when you go this high, and it's not. We're doing all right. So it's not being used subtly, but it's doing the trick. Next, I have one of my favorite EQs in the world, hardware and software, a 1073. And I can see we're doing a little low cut here, right at around 50 hertz. We are boosting 60, which for me is kind of like that meat and potatoes bass frequency. We're also boosting a little bit of 3K, which is going to give us a little bit of presence. And then we're doing something very similar than what we did with the initial EQ on our fixed top end knob here, which I believe is 12K. We're knocking down a whole bunch of that again. So I could only assume the reason I did this was because the Transient Designer brought out a little bit more of that graininess. So it's a lot of going back with trial and error. Here's without, and then with. So it's interesting that I'm cutting some of the lows out, but because I'm cutting so much of that 12K out, it is starting to seem fatter. However, now the tone is more appropriate to what I was hearing in my head, right? We have the arpeggiated thing, we have this in-your-face low sub, but we feel the movement. Okay, now what I did was put a big no-no on this bass track. And I made the executive decision to bring out the mids in the center and then bring up the sides. So that way I can start sculpting things inside of that bass, right? Because if I put it right in the middle, that bass sound might not be as cool as it was. However, when you know that you're going to do it and then you're going to sculpt things inside of it instead of around it on the outside, it's okay. So here's with it and then without. So I'll play it again with it. And if you don't hear the difference, then you haven't quite mastered the fact that the vocal is the most important thing ever in any mix that you do. Because what center did was give us just enough room in the center that it will not be taking up any room of a vocal. And even though our vocal's a lot higher of a frequency, it's not going to be in the way at all. Especially Juliana, who has a really nice husky low-end quality to her voice. So here it is again with the spread. Next in our chain, we have an S1 imager. And what I'm doing now is I'm taking those sides that we just brought out and I'm just closing them in a little bit, right? Because when it comes time for our chorus and we want everything to explode and we start putting guitars left and right, we have cymbals, room mics, we don't want all this room taken up. So I made a very specific decision here, and I can only assume that this was done once I had more elements in the mix. I made the executive decision that, okay, the spread's great, I cleaned out the center, however now it's too wide, let's rein it in a little bit. And you'd never be able to do something like this in solo, which is why I say I had to have made this decision once we had other things in the mix. And I know I made the next decision as an afterthought as well, because the next plugin that we have in the chain is Guitar Rig. And I'm using the Tractor 12, the Gator, and the Beat Slicer. And I have basically, you know, a little bit of dry, a little bit of wet on each. And what they're doing, they're creating a stutter. So I can only assume, again, that after my drums were in, my guitars, my vocals, I felt like I was losing that arpeggiated movement again, right? It's all trial and error. You know, every single piece of the puzzle opens up your mind to seeing something else, or hearing something else in this case. So here it is without either one of these, and then I will put the gator on, we'll listen to the difference, maybe talk about it, and then we'll put on the beat slicer. Alright, so now we're really emphasizing the beats that we want. Here's where we started. Here's where we ended up. Cool. So we have two more bass tracks in this song, actually. I knew that I wanted live bass for the chorus because I knew I wanted to put live drums in the chorus, and I was just feeling that I wanted to hear some human interaction in there. This is bounced, which tells me two things. Number one, like most of my live bass tracks, was recorded through an Ampeg with an RE20 and a 421, and once I got the balance of those two mics, I bounced it, and it also is showing me the waveforms look pretty good. Let's enhance them a little bit. There's no doubt that I ran through a distressor either during tracking or directly after, and then bounced it because I knew I was going to want to use my distressors for vocals. Now, this bass is interesting because I used the compressor like an instrument. Let's check this out for a second, and it'll make more sense once we have some drums in. As I said before, I'm using the compressor, if you can feel that pumping action. I'm using the compressor as an instrument. Everyone knows we can tame peaks, bring up lower sounds with a compressor, but some people forget that we can also make things move certain ways. We can make things feel like they're there. We can make things feel like they're here. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a little bit of all of that. And I'm giving it this motion that it's actually wow, 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 swelling up in volume. And I'm doing that by kind of crushing the attack on the distressor. I'm crushing that attack, and then I'm really setting the release. I wish I still had the settings, I do not. But I'm setting the release in a rhythmic motion. So it probably was a lot of listening and a lot of watching the meters, just so I can get that feeling. Dun, 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 dun. Let's listen again, you'll feel it. So you really feel that release, letting it open up in a rhythmic kind of way. So that's what I did for the live bass. There's probably not much going on. I probably recorded both mics through outboard going in with a little bit of compression and EQ, which is why there's no plugins on this track. And then in our bridge, we have a distorted bass. So let's hear what that's doing naturally. I love that. Love it. So right off the bat, it was tracked with distortion. We don't have any plugins on right now. One of my favorite pedals for bass is actually a guitar pedal by Nemphasis Pedals from Italy. They make a pedal called the Muff. Sorry, I have a lot of fuzz pedals, and the names sometimes become one. The Muff is a great fuzz pedal that's not too fuzzy, so I love it on bass. And Nemphasis thought I was crazy when I told them, hey, I want one of those for bass. And they said, it's not a bass pedal. Doesn't matter. Sounds great. Let's listen to it again. Love it. All right, let's see what's going on the chain here. So we've got our Waves Factory track spacer again. This time it's being sidechained to our live drums. And again, I'm not using a high ratio at all, 18%. So it's working a little magic. It's letting the kick drum and those lower frequencies in the drums win the battle, but not too much. And then I have a little bit of a room simulator on there, and I'm using Ocean Way Studios for that. Let's listen with it on, and then we'll disengage. So what that's doing is pushing it to the back a little bit. We're using just one mic, the mid mic. We have it in remic mode, and we're completely wet on that. So we're basically remicing this bass. So I'll put it on while we're listening to it, and you'll see it just go whoosh, just push to the back of the spectrum a little bit. Big difference. It's not like in your face, and probably because there's a guitar going on in there, so I wanted to give the low end a little bit of its own room. And then after that UAD Ocean Way, I have just a little bit EQ. It seems like I'm knocking out 240, a little bit of the boxiness. Yeah, so we're thinning that out a little bit. That's typically, I don't know if it's just my room or if it's a thing in general, you know, between 200 and 300, if there's some kind of buildup that's a little nasty, that's where it's going to be, especially on bass. So that's all our bass. And now the fun stuff. Let's move on to drums. So going back to our first verse, now that we have some bass in context, there's a lot of really cool things going on. So let's start with our 808 kicks, which we call soft kick. Okay, so we're creating a heartbeat, right? We're emphasizing the beats that we want to on that arpeggiated bass with this soft kick. EQ-wise, as you can see, I don't have much going on. I put a little point on it, pretty much at like 2.5K. I'm putting that point on it so it pokes out a little more. Let's listen to it. Not much, and the reason why I don't have to do too much is because we're keying the bass with that, remember? So let's open up our synth bass again. Now we can actually really see what track spacer is doing and why the kick drum's not necessarily winning the battle, but it's working and it's actually audible, and it's pretty much same frequency range. Cool. Nothing that exciting going on there. One piece of the puzzle, our soft kick right there. After that, we have a delayed kick. So we're using Ultra Beat. Let's see what's going on here in context with the bass and this soft kick. Cool. All right, so it's bringing back a little bit of that knock effect that I had in the demo, right? Now I have a bunch of stuff going on here, so let's see. Crystallizer is the first one by Sound Toys. I'm using a preset, a doubler. Let's see what that's doing. Okay, it's not doing too much except for just spreading it out a little bit. I also have the track panned over there, so it's totally away from our other kick drum. Cool, so it seems to me like this was just a production call. You know, we're emphasizing that, okay, the one's coming around. We got some other stuff going on here. We have a channel EQ. We're giving it some low end, we're cutting out a lot of mids, and then we're taking out some highs. So it almost seems to me like we gave it a little bit more of an 808 feel. We got some compression after that. I love this tube tech by UAD, by the way. Cool, so that's kind of just controlling our peaks here. I think it pushed it back a little bit. Let's listen again. Yeah, exactly. So this compressor kind of made it feel a little bit more like the heartbeat kick, the soft kick. So here it is without, and then I'll put it on. Yeah, so it's taming the peaks, and it also made it gel a little bit more with that other kick. And then we have our trusty stereo delay from Logic. Let's see what that's doing. Cool, so just a very simple 16th note delay. Here it is in solo. And it works nicely with our soft 808 kick. Pretty cool, something's coming together. Don't know what yet. Here we got some snare, so let's see what's going on there. Again, in context with the bass, so we know what's going on. Okay, so it's not just a snare. We should relabel this. Let's just call it Ultra Beat Kit, because that's essentially what's going on there. So we got some different sounding snares. I'm bringing back that knock thing, that knock effect sound from the demo again. But now we got some movement with the hi-hat. I'm using Crystallizer again on this. Same exact preset, the Great Doubler. Let's see what that's doing. Cool, so that just spread it out big time. So now, again, we're getting frequencies away from our center. I'm using the Tube Tech again, and it looks like all these settings were actually just copied and pasted over. Same thing with our stereo delay. So let's listen. So I'm being very subtle, right? Production-wise. Mix-wise, I'm just giving it some ambience, I'm giving it texture, I'm giving it its own space. It's all gelling together really well, and it's, you know, a lot of this is low frequency information. So it's really just about managing that to get it to work well. The one thing I did add to this is this awesome plugin. It's the Butch Vig Vocals plugin. I'm using the Butch Vig Telephone 1 preset, and I'm sure I went in and fumbled around. If I might not have, also because the presets are great. Let's see what that's doing. So basically we just made it lo-fi, right? Which I'm all about. Here it is without. And then with. Cool, very nice. And then we are sending this out to our EMT plate. A really short one, actually. Let's hear what that's doing. Here it is on. So it's pretty short, but it's very wet. Let's hear it in solo for a second. So what I like about it, it's smoothing out a lot of the delays that are on there. And it's also, because we spread it out using that Crystallizer, the reverb's kind of gluing it all to be kind of like a nice like smear across our spectrum. Still with a nice spread though. Okay, well that's cool, and there's not much to it. Here's the sound. Nasty. It's not a great sounding thing. And then we have another one right underneath that. However, on this one, I am using aha. So instead of putting a delay on it and automating it, I just copied and pasted the track, and then put this Manny Marroquin reggae delay on it. And to me, it sounds like it's totally wet. Where is that happening? Is it total? Yep, here we go. It's totally wet. So we have the dry signal coming from this lo-fi snare hit and totally wet signal coming from this lo-fi snare effects. Definitely a nice echo, call and response kind of thing. Here it is in context with all our other elements of the kit. It's just a really nice little puzzle that makes you want to rock your head back and forth. Okay, there's one awesome thing left here in the verse. I'm going to let you in on a trick of something I do a lot. There's a lot of this in the song, and we'll get to it in other sections. It's reverse drums, and here's what they sound like soloed. So it seems like they were processed with a little bit of verb on them, and then I spun them backwards. Here's what they sound like with everything else. Awesome. I love putting things in reverse. So let's see what's going on here plugin wise. Whoa. Are we going to get some YouTube comments about that? All right, let's listen with it on and see why this multi-band compression is ridiculous. All right, there's a lot of things going on, so let's solo. Basically, what I'm trying to do here is make this have its own space, not get in the way of any of our other elements, right? And because we're using something in reverse, we're gonna get a lot of, not artificial, but a lot of things that we didn't expect or we couldn't really troubleshoot beforehand, right? Like when cymbals start swelling in and out and cutting off really tightly. Those are things you really can't control before you record it, especially if you know you're going to turn it in reverse, right? So let me solo what the low bands are doing. So this is pretty much 100 to 300, 400 range. This is soloed. So we're bringing up a lot of the lows in there, but it's definitely a higher frequency than our bass. Let's see what the mids are doing. So that's the stuff I was talking about before, that you can't troubleshoot that before you record it if you're going to put it in reverse. That's just a lot of really hard transients on the snare, cutting in, cutting out, swelling up, swelling down. We're controlling it. Let's see about our top end here. And just like I mentioned before, so as wacky as this looks, it's doing everything we needed to do. We're controlling all of our elements of a sound that is not natural. Live drum track, spun in reverse. Here's the before and after. Little harsh. Here's with it. A lot more pleasing. Okay, so when I go this surgical with an EQ, that's telling me that it was done after the fact. I already got the sound with my multiband, but now there's some frequencies I either need to boost or cut depending on what's going on around it. So we got this boost here at around 40 hertz, which there's a lot of things being boosted in some of these tracks that I wouldn't normally go for. But that's why I know I put this on after the fact. It was fixing something else or putting it in a place or beating the battle of something else that was up there. We're cutting out some boxiness. Again, it's like between 200 and 300. And then I'm completely notching out 3K. So I'm basically, there's something else going on in this mix where 3K needed to win, and it wasn't on this reverse drums track. And then on top of that, I have, again, a trusty Logic stereo delay, and we're using this in quarter notes, actually, because as you know, we're trying to vary all these sounds. We have our kick drums with a 16th note delay. We have our bass with an 8th note delay arpeggio. It only makes sense now that we have a stereo delay with a quarter note. So let's listen to what it's doing. Smoothing everything out, okay? And I just want to point out, you'll see me send things out to delays and reverbs, and then you'll see me put them directly on the track. In this case, the stereo delay is on this track because I consider this track an effects track. I think that what I'm creating with this stereo delay is part of the sound of what I'm listening to. There's no reason to send it out. It's a very specific delay doing something very specific. I'm not going to use it for anything else because these reverse drums need their own space. So let me play you some other reverse drums because they get a little crazier later on. Okay, so I love turning things in reverse. If you're a drummer, you probably love checking this out. Let me teach you, if you don't know, basically how to get this vibe. Let me teach you what I did.